Welcome to the EOA's How to Become Employee-Owned webinar. If this is your first time at one of our virtual events, it's lovely to have you join us. The EOA is a membership organisation. We represent businesses across the UK that are employee-owned or transitioning to employee ownership. My name is Yogi Johnston. I'm Product Development Manager here. And in today's 90-minute webinar, you're going to hear from two guest speakers about the key things to consider when making a move to employee ownership, followed by a Q&A session. After the Q&A, you'll also have an opportunity to go into our virtual networking lounge and talk more informally with our guest speakers. So I'm confident that you're going to leave today with some top tips, advice, as well as understanding what your next steps will be with regards to employee ownership. But before we get too deep into the detail, let's take a step back and look at the sector you would be joining if you became employee-owned and how you'd be supported. There are over 1,600 businesses that are now employee-owned, and they're spread across all areas of the UK and all industry sectors, so you will be in good company. And we're continuing to see year-on-year growth of businesses. Last year alone, we saw a growth of 30% of businesses move into employee ownership. As you start to consider these numbers and the growth, you might be asking, how successful are EO businesses? How productive are they? Are employees genuinely better off? We pose these same questions to EO businesses across the UK through the EO Knowledge Programme research last year. And we have to say the evidence we gathered validated what we've been hearing anecdotally from our EOA members over the years. For me, the key standout results were that EO businesses are 8 to 12% more productive and that they invest more into training for their employees, but also give more out in terms of bonuses. And on the flip side, there's also more charitable giving. For me, these are really, really positive and, as I said, validate what we've been hearing. And what's more, this piece of research has provided us with valuable and practical insight that we can now use to help businesses thrive in the future. So as a membership organisation, the EOA has been supporting EO businesses to achieve these great results for the last 45 years. Over the years, we've gained some iconic businesses into membership. And at last count, we had over 750 businesses in our membership network. But don't be fooled, behind those more recognisable businesses that you see here, we have many small to medium businesses across sectors and geographies, and we support them, we champion them, and we gather insight from them to share with others. The EOA's purpose is to unlock the potential of people, business, and ultimately the economy. For us, we do this by providing advice, learning and connections around what it means to have a great employee-owned business for our members. Our members share generously their stories, and I will say, warts and all, to help others. It's not always plain sailing, but what we do see is that there is a real learning sense within the organisations. We work for our members to ensure that we deliver tailored support, relevant EO training courses, engaging, inspiring events like these webinars and our annual conference. And we also have what we call the EO Hub, which is our platform for connecting our members together, encouraging forum discussions in different groups. And we have a resource library, which is fairly extensive now. It includes template documents shared by members and recordings of all of our previous webinars. So at whatever point you join us, you'll always have that wealth of information there. And we're also the voice of the EO sector. With over 750 businesses, we seek views from those businesses. We find ways to have a seat at the table to participate in key discussions that might impact our members. So if you're not an EOA member yet, I hope you will be soon. I mentioned we have EO-specific training courses. So this is the role that I mostly do at the EOA here, is deliver those crucial EO-specific training courses to the market. We have a couple coming up soon, which I think will really help you in your journey to become employee-owned, if that's the decision. On the 25th of April, we have our Leadership Succession Workshop, which is delivered by our partners, Telos Partners and JGAD Associates. This one-day in-person masterclass has been developed after some research done into what it takes to have successful change in leadership when a business becomes employee-owned. This course will help those taking on the leadership mantle to integrate a positive leadership style with what we call the key components of great employee ownership. So it's really setting up that leadership change for success from day one. A few days later, on the 30th of April, you can join Harry Pocknell from Creative Salad for a short, very practical course designed to help you develop your key messaging around transitioning to EO. It's the one thing that we get so many of our members asking us is how do we best communicate our journey and our story around employee ownership? This course does that. And especially one of the things that we always hear is how do you communicate the non-financial benefits of employee ownership? Again, this is what this course is tailored to do. You can view and book all of our upcoming training courses on our webpage. So on to our events. We have virtual and in-person events designed to bring our network together, to connect, to share with each other. All of our events are free to members, apart from our annual conference, which last year was a sellout. So this year, we've got the conference happening on the 26th to the 27th of November. And if you want to make sure you're first in line to get some tickets, you can register your interest. There will be a link that's posted in the chat. For other opportunities to come and meet the network, we have an IRL, in real life, network meeting happening in London. So you can sign up for that. And also, if you want to hear some exciting news and updates, you can join our people-powered business event, including our AGM in April. For these events, you can book through our website. Okay. So I've taken you through a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the EO sector and the EOA. I think we need to get down into the nitty-gritty of actually becoming employee-owned. I have two great speakers with me today, and they will be sharing their insight. We've got Sarah Anderson from RM2, and RM2 have very kindly sponsored this event. They themselves are an employee-owned consultancy specialising in designing, implementing and administering all types of employee ownership solutions for private and listed companies. Sarah is the business development manager for RM2. She has a wealth of experience in the EO sector, especially share schemes. We're also going to hear from John Murphy from Arbuckles. John and Maxine Murphy opened their first restaurant in 2008 and transitioned to an EOT in December 2018. John is going to give you his personal and honest experience of exploring and the journey they took to becoming an EOT. So before I welcome them on stage, as they're speaking, please do ask your questions in the Q&A section. This is your opportunity to kind of get those questions that you're thinking about out into the open. If there's a question that someone's already asked, please upvote for it. It tells me that that question is popular, and I'll know to make sure that I ask it. Also, I know it sounds really silly, but send some emojis their way. It's always great for them to have little smiley faces or thumbs up. It helps them kind of engage with you guys as the audience. We'll have about 20 minutes for the Q&A, after which you will be transported to our virtual networking area where you can talk to John and Sarah in more detail, but also you can talk to our membership team and you can come and chat to me about EO training. Anyway, without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah from RM2.
Sorry, technical difficulty there logging in. So I'm sorry, I was sitting waiting patiently for everybody. Thank you very much, Eki, for that kind introduction. As she's explained, I'm the business development manager at RM2 Partnership. I'm also a share plan solicitor. RM2 is an independent specialist consultancy that delivers all types of employee share ownership to its clients. We work mainly with private companies and sometimes with smaller listed companies, but our focus is very much on privately owned and often owner managed businesses. So today, next slide, please. I'm just going to be doing a really quick introduction to the big question of how do I become employee owned? How does my business achieve employee ownership? And it's going to be a bit of a whistle stop tour because there are many ways in which your company can become employee owned. So to start with, I suppose the big question is, what even is employee ownership? Well, we view that it's a bit of a wide church, but a business that is entirely or significantly owned by its employees. So we could be looking at a company that is majority or wholly owned by employees, or just minority stakes held by individuals. You can achieve that status of employee ownership indirectly, which is often where shares are held by way of a trust. And the common approach here is the indirect ownership model, the employee ownership trust, which a lot of EO members use. But an alternative to that is direct ownership, where employees as individuals hold shares in their business, might be in small quantities, might be in large quantities. And then finally, you can actually mix the two up. So you can have part of your company, or the majority of it, owned by a trust, and the rest of the shares in the company held directly by individuals. So I'm just going to run through quickly the different ways of doing that. So I'll move on to the next slide, which is a quick summary of the indirect share ownership route, which is using the employee ownership trust, which is, as Yogi's already explained, an increasingly popular way of businesses becoming employee owned. And an employee ownership trust, or EOT, is a particular type of trust into which business owners can sell a majority stake of their shares. So 50% plus whatever. Very commonly, business owners will sell all of their shares, so the company actually becomes 100% employee owned. And what happens as a consequence of that is that you have this trust, the EOT, which holds shares itself, but indirectly on behalf of all of the eligible employees in the company. Effectively, doesn't do anything with the shares, doesn't get any dividends on them, just sits there and holds them so that it is a controlling party acting for all of the employees in the business. The big outcome for sellers who are selling to an employee ownership trust is this is actually a really great alternative exit route for businesses who are looking for succession solutions. It's much easier and actually much cheaper and much quicker and generally much less traumatic to sell your business to an employee ownership trust than it is to sell to a third party. You have significantly fewer warranties, fewer guarantees, and a whole lot less due diligence, because effectively the buyer is almost the company itself. Everybody on both sides of the transaction understands about the business, its history, its finances, and what it's going to be doing in the future. So it's an awful lot nicer as a transaction than selling to a third party. And of course, it is almost always far preferable to winding up the business and distributing the assets. An awful lot of our clients who sell to EOTs have been running their business for years, sometimes for generations. They're very proud of their business. They're proud of the culture. They want to protect the employees. The last thing they want to do is to sell their business to a competitor or just wind it up and disappear the company. Not great for the community, for the locality, and for business in general. It's not a nice feeling. So it's a really good alternative way out for business owners looking to sell their businesses, but without those negative implications of selling to somebody else. It's also tax efficiency is a bit of a it's not just tax efficient. You pay no capital gains tax if you sell your shares to an employee ownership trust, so it makes it very, very attractive alternative as well. Control is passed to the trustees of the employee ownership trust, who must act in the best interests of the beneficiaries, or the employees, and the vendors can also retain a minority interest in the business if they wish to do that. So you might sell, for example, 75% of shares to the EOT, retain a 25% interest for yourself, which means that you can, for example, continue to receive dividends on your shares and maintain that sense of ownership. For the employees, of course, they become owners. They are effectively owners of the business by way of the trust. I've mentioned that the EOT trust won't get any dividend payments on its shares, largely because it's not very tax efficient to do that. So employees won't get dividends on the shares, they won't be able to vote their shares necessarily, but they are still owners of the business and the trust will act in their best interests. The key thing for employee owners is that they will have an opportunity to share in the profits of the company in the future, and they can do that at least in part by way of a tax-free bonus. Employee-owned EOT controlled companies can pay bonuses to each employee of up to £3,600 per annum. No income tax, national insurance contributions do apply, but it's a very nice tax-free bonus for employees. And for the business, you've got a long-term sustainable succession solution, a great ownership model, which protects the company's future and hopefully maintains the company's culture in the future. So that's the indirect share ownership model. I'm just going to talk quickly through the next slide, which looks at direct share ownership, which is where you have employees either owning shares directly or having the rights to acquire those shares, perhaps by way of a share option. And there are multiple alternatives for private companies to use if they want to put in an employee share plan. You have various tax advantaged options. So, for example, the very popular enterprise management incentive scheme, which is great for smaller companies, fewer than 250 employees. And you have the company share option plan, which also delivers a very tax efficient option scheme for slightly large businesses. We put those in an awful lot of the time for private companies. Very commonly, they're put in place to reward employees on an exit of the company. So when the business is sold, they get to sell their shares alongside the majority owners. But equally, employees can sometimes exercise options, acquire shares in the business and become part owners themselves and thus benefit from any votes or dividends that are attached to the shares. So an option plan is a really nice, flexible way of getting your employees to become owners. Grant options, employees only become owners when they exercise the option, which might be after, say, 3 years if you wanted to confirm an element of loyalty, or subject to performance conditions if you want particular targets hit before employees become owners. If you're feeling generous and particularly equitable in your approach to employee share schemes, there is also a fantastic all-employee share plan called a share incentive plan, which must be made available to all employees in the business, but is also the only way that you can give shares to your employees, shares with value, without employees becoming subject to a tax charge. Share incentive plan ultimately will deliver zero tax rates for your employees who acquire shares, no income tax, no national insurance contributions, no capital gains tax when the shares are sold. So it's a brilliantly tax efficient scheme, and if you are considering wider employee share ownership, it is definitely one worth thinking about. Employees, of course, can also purchase shares directly, just pay full market value for the shares, or pay less than market value and be subject to a tax charge on the value of the shares, and they could build up their ownership in that way. So there are multiple ways of delivering employee share ownership across the board for all employees, or just for key employees if you wish to do that. And the outcomes for employees there, as I say, they have the potential to vote their shares, they have the potential to receive dividends on their shares, and if the business is ever sold, including, by the way, to an employee ownership trust, they can share in the returns on the sale of a business. I could talk about employee share plans for many hours, but I don't suppose you really want to hear about them now. I just wanted to kind of give you a flavour of how you can deliver ownership in a company in a direct fashion. So finally, I'm going to look at what we call the hybrid solution. So onto the next slide, where we have a mix of an employee ownership trust and a direct share ownership model. And we are increasingly seeing our EOT transaction clients use this model. One of the joys of the employee ownership trust is that you end up with a trust that controls the business, so it has more than 50% of the shares, but it can still operate direct share incentive schemes in the remaining 50% of the company. So you could either do it with the employee ownership trust acquiring 100% of the shares and then issuing new shares to employees over time, or you could simply have the employee ownership trust buying 51% from the owners and the owners transferring their shares out to employees directly. As long as the employee ownership trust holds more than 50% of the share capital in the company, and that includes 50% of the rights to votes, 50% of the rights to assets on the winding up, 50% of the rights to dividends, you can use the remaining 49% of the share capital for your employee share schemes. So what you could end up doing is you have an EOT, which is able to pay tax-free bonuses to employees, the £3,600 worth of tax-free bonus that I mentioned before. The EOT creates your sustainable ownership model. It maintains control of the company. Your company is controlled by its employees and run on behalf of the employees. And the remaining 49% you can use for additional motivation, for example, for your key employees. So one very important part of transitioning to an EOT, for example, is thinking about the next senior leadership team that you're going to put in place. If you are leaving the company, whether it's at the time of the transaction or a few years later, you're going to need some really good, strong directors leading the company and driving it forward in its next part of the journey as an employee-owned business. And there is absolutely no reason why an EOT controlled business can't motivate its key directors separately over and above the other employees. An EOT controlled business is a business like any other business. You still need to retain the best staff. You need to motivate them and you need to reward them. And using equity incentives is a really good way of doing that. Employees, once they've acquired additional shares, can receive additional dividends on top of those tax-free bonuses. And there is the ability, once you've set up your employee-owned business, to create an internal marketplace enabling employees to buy and sell shares within the confines of the company itself. Often you'll use a separate employee benefit trust to do that, which will act as a marketplace. But the key thing is it gives you the ability there to structure additional capital returns for your key staff. Or you could use the SIP and have additional capital returns for all of your staff if you wish to do that. We are seeing some of companies putting in place an all-employee share incentive plan on top of their EOT, so all employees get additional dividends and rewards via the share incentive plan. Because of the huge range of share schemes available for private companies, all of which that can be operated in an EOT controlled business, really the sky's the limit in terms of your imagination about how you run your employee-owned company going forward. And actually, this is a really good point now for me to say, these are just the practicalities and they're the legally bits and they're the boring bits. The next speaker, John Murphy of Arbuckles, is going to tell the real story behind all this legal nonsense I've been going on about. Arbuckles transitioned to EOT in 2018, and John has created a rather wonderful hybrid model which has made his business a huge success following on the EOT transaction. So I will pass on now to John. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you found the next section interesting.
Hello. As Sarah said, thanks for the welcome, Sarah. I've been asked to present our journey into employee ownership. In 2008, I had no idea at all about employee ownership. With myself and my wife, Maxine, had built a successful business. I'll tell you very briefly about the business. We opened in 2008, Arbuckles restaurant, which is an American style restaurant. And we opened in a derelict Little Chef site. The restaurant was very successful very quickly, and we expanded from a 100 cover restaurant to a 340 cover restaurant in a matter of 4 or 5 years. Obviously, growing a business that quickly does have its problems, but it was exceptionally successful. So from there, we opened a second restaurant, our Ely restaurant. And again, that was 7 years after the initial restaurant opened. Very successful as well, did 3 times more sales than we expected to. And so we were always catching our tail to employ enough staff and to make sure we were doing well. In 2017, myself and Maxine had decided that we had more or less had enough, and we were looking for an exit option. We suffered from a bit of guilt. We were the restaurant, as I say, was as successful as it was, and although the early years of building the business took a huge amount of work, the later years required less work, and it felt guilty the returns we were getting. We'd had a tremendous set of staff. The restaurant, and then eventually somebody said to me, why don't you sell it, the business, to an employee-owned restaurant, an employee-owned business? Their pitch was, you can sell the restaurant, you can sell your company effectively for nothing to the staff. At the time, that didn't sound like a very good plan. We wanted to get good value from the restaurant. Took me about 2 or 3 months to get my head around the whole concept of selling the business for nothing. Effectively, the staff had to provide nothing other than their work in the future. After speaking to a few advisors, I was put in touch with RM2, who at the time, and probably still are, were the market leaders. They talked through the process from start to finish. And again, it took 3 or 4 conversations till I fully understood the concept. And to be honest, I never believed it. It seemed to be far too good to be true. Everybody from the transaction was a winner. We would sell our business for full market value. The staff would own the business, and there would be no disruption. It was a fairly quick transaction. I just couldn't believe it was possible to do that. So after 2 or 3 months, we met with RM2 again, and we did a feasibility study where we presented all the accounts of the business, discussed how it would work, the succession plan within the business as well. And we came up with an outline value and a time period that the transaction would take to happen, and also how long the repayment of the vendor's loan would take. Ours was a little bit more complicated than most because we had an external funder as well. We used a bank called ThinkCats, who lent, I think, about 70% of the value, and then 30% we kept as a vendor's loan that was paid back after the bank was paid out. The whole process was a 5-year process in principle, and I employed a managing director to replace me, and our idea was, we sold the company, we would still be involved because we had a vendor's loan, a fairly substantial vendor's loan, but we wouldn't really involved with the day-to-day running, more the account side of the business. As Sarah had mentioned, we adopted the hybrid model. Our business, we have 160 or 170 staff within the business. They are made up of management team who drive the business forward. They're made up of long-term staff who've been with us from day one. But it's also made up with sixth form students, university students that come back and are very seasonal workers before they embark on a full career. The employee ownership trust wouldn't have benefited them because they wouldn't have worked for us in 5 years. So we needed to have a model that kept some business drivers in the business. So we used the EMI scheme. So we sold 100% to the EOT and then diluted down 49%, which were awarded as share options, that after the debt period was paid off, that the key people within the team who own 1, 2, 3% of the business could then exercise those options and directly own the shares. The whole process from start to finish, bearing in mind we had to pitch to banks, and we got 3 or 4 different banks that were willing to lend the money, took, I think, 20 weeks. If we hadn't involved third-party finance, it probably would have only taken 12 or 14 weeks, depending on HMRC approval, how long that took, and that took a few weeks longer than expected. In terms of the process, myself and Maxine were involved in the process from start to finish. We only involved 4 or 5 key people in the business beforehand, mainly because I didn't believe it was going to happen. It seemed far too good to be true, so I didn't really think, although we'd embarked on it, I thought something this good couldn't happen, so something would probably scupper it along the way. We discussed it with the key management and sort of said, take this with a pinch of salt. This is what we plan to do. It seems like a brilliant solution. Would you be interested in taking the business forward? Of course, they were interested in doing it. They didn't necessarily understand what it required. So the day that we transitioned to an employee ownership trust, fully owned business by the staff, 99% of the staff had known nothing about it. We called a meeting where we got all the staff together. We actually shut the restaurants, which we'd never done in the entire time that we'd had the restaurants. We shut the restaurants for an hour in the morning where we presented it to the staff. Of course, like myself, when we presented it to them, they didn't understand what it was. They, some thought they owned the restaurant outright straight away, and that was it. Everyone was going to be rich. We laboured the point that that's not the case. The restaurant is being paid for fully. Myself and Maxine got full value of the company, but that was being paid out of future profits. So it was basically a 5-year where nothing would change. It was as if they were still working for an external company, but because we had a third-party lender, ThinkCats, all the profit that we made went to pay those back. And then our 5 years was up as of December 2023. So all the money that the business now generates is being accrued to pay our first EOT bonuses from December this year. We paid our first dividend out the 31st of January, which was paid out to the 49% owners, and they were very happy to receive that. In terms of how the process worked, we've got an EOT board, which is made up of 5 people, myself and Maxine, and then 3 people from the business. We've got a company board, which operates exactly the same, the operational company as it would, but that is owned effectively majority by the employee ownership trust. And then about 6 months before we paid off ThinkCats, we set up an employee ownership council where all the staff from their different departments had a representative who came to the meetings so that we could plan how we were going to pay the bonuses out. Our business has, some people that work 1 day a week on a Saturday. Some people work 45, 50 hours a week. So we needed to come up with a fair way. All staff in a trust have to be treated equally, but within equally, some people put more in than others. So we decided to distribute the bonuses based on length of service with the company, and also amount of hours worked across a year. And that model was come up with by the staff, and I just had to present that to RM2, Sarah, to make sure that we fully complied with all the laws, so we didn't lose the tax-free bonus, tax-free allowance on the bonuses that they would get. So in terms of the journey, when we embarked on it, I had no clue about it. It was fantastic from myself and Maxine's point of view, because as Sarah said, the sale proceeds were fully tax-free. So on day one of the sale, we received, other than the vendor's loan that we lent to the company, we received all the money from ThinkHats, and that was tax-free. And then from there, the company just paid the monthly loan repayments to ThinkHats until we got to a point where we could take ThinkHats out of the equation, and it was just the vendor's loan that existed. With the vendor's loan, we had no issue with paying out the full bonuses once that had occurred, and that's the situation we're in now. So we've gone from a situation where I had no idea about what an employee-owned business was, to becoming one, to tailoring a model around what we wanted it to be for us, and obviously falling within the confines of every law, and you learn different laws as you go along. It has been a phenomenal process. There has been hiccups along the way. I've learned a lot about that I wish I'd known at the start. As I say, I employed somebody to replace me because we effectively were expecting to come back for accounts meetings once a month and say, very well done, keep it going. That didn't necessarily work out the way I'd planned. So within 10 months, we made the decision that I was going to come back as managing director, just to make sure, and it was in a voluntary role, just to make sure everything happened the way that it should. Although all the staff were the same, the decisions that were getting made weren't always the way that I would want them to be, and weren't always the most profitable decisions. And obviously we had debt on our back, so we had to make sure we were making the profit we needed to service that debt. In terms of how much time that takes me now, I've got somebody lined up to replace myself, and at the moment I'm spending 3 or 4 hours a week within the business, and it's not actually making decisions anymore. It's just seeing all the questions that come along. But over the past 4 years, the people within the business have grown up massively in terms of how to operate the business, and they're making phenomenal decisions now. And I'm so proud of them. They've done unbelievably well to go from where they were owners of the business without a clue how to run a business, to now owners of the business that know how to run a business and know how to make the right decisions. Other than that, hopefully there'll be lots of questions that come up, because I really, the reason I agreed to do this presentation today, and I'm sure you can see that it's not my natural bag, is because I was so skeptical about the process. I was probably one of the most distrusting people about how this could work, because generally when you're presented with something that seems too good to be true, it normally is. And the reason that I'm such an ambassador for employee ownership trusts now is because I had all of those emotions that, oh, well, what's happening? This isn't good enough. Even after the event, I told some of my friends about it who had businesses. I said, you should do this. And they didn't believe it was possible. 3 of them have now transitioned into employee ownership trust businesses. I've still got so many friends that haven't done it. And I say, you can stay within the business, be part of the business. But generally, if you're selling a business, it takes quite a lot of time to sell it. You have the uncertainties of what's going to happen. Also, from my point of view, when we did leave the business, you do miss something. It's been a massive part of your life. You've had to answer questions on a daily basis that become incredibly frustrating at the time, but when you're not asked those questions, you do personally miss something within your life. So the blend that I have now, I wish I'd gone with, not in terms of, I wish I'd just always agreed to be part of the business just on a less responsible role. Then my expectations were sell the business, come back in, do monthly accounts meetings, and hey presto, everything's done. So that's one thing I would change my expectations. I would phase myself out slowly, and we'd probably still be in exactly the same position we are, but I had quite a few decisions to make where I had to put myself back in the business. I think that's it from me. I'm looking forward to meeting people on the table and talking through different questions that you might have. And the offer, if anyone ever wants to make a trek out to Norfolk or Cambridgeshire and come and see either of the two restaurants, as I say, I am an ambassador purely because the ability for staff to own a business is something I never had as when I entered business, and I find it amazing. So anyone wants to come see the business, talk to the staff, talk to myself, then I'm sure my email address will be given out, and I'm more than happy to meet up with people. Thank you very much. I think that is me done.
Thank you, John. And hopefully we're getting Sarah back on stage soon as well.
Here I am.
Thank you both for those insights, and yeah, John, for that story. For me, I love the way you kind of went, oh, it's too good to be true. You've, as you said, you've done it and you've come out the other side, and you've seen the real positive impact. Right, so we've got about 20-25 minutes for questions, and I'm going to jump right in because we've got lots of questions from the audience. The first couple are for you, Sarah. They're around the EOT distribution of profit. So the first question is, if you set up an EOT and the trust has excess profit after distributing the 3,600 tax-free to all employees, how is the remaining profit distributed?
Well, that is really entirely down to the company. Provided the company is making enough profits, and you've decided to distribute full 3/6 to all of your employees on an equal basis, assuming you do that. You don't have to, but that's an easy way of managing it. And then you have sufficient profits to give out more bonuses. You can set up any kind of bonus scheme that you would want in any other business. It can be attached to performance conditions. Or you almost inevitably going to be paying your senior staff higher bonuses. It depends what your business requirements are. They won't be tax efficient bonuses, they'll just be fully taxable bonuses as in any other business. The only caveat I would say to that is that this is absolutely not a requirement of the legislation. It is absolutely a suggestion. If you are an employee-owned business, does it run with the spirit of employee ownership to pay your highest directors vast quantities when your lower earners aren't getting any bonus at all? But there is nothing to stop you doing that if it's a commercial requirement.
Thank you, Sarah. John, I'm actually going to ask you a slightly follow-up question, because I know that you mentioned you've got a kind of representative council setting up setting up. And I think you might have kind of posed the question to them in terms of the profit and how it could be distributed. Yeah.
We did, yeah. So we have different departments within the business that have different workloads. So we've got table clearers, we've got bar staff, we've got chefs, we've got management team. And we've got the two restaurants, and they're very competitive between the two restaurants, and they have different needs. And so we got representation from each department, from each restaurant, got them together and said, we're going to have this amount of money, we think, to distribute at the end of this year. How do you think the best way to distribute that money is? Bearing in mind, you wouldn't expect somebody that works 4 hours a week to get the same as somebody that's worked for, let's say, the full period of time, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. We've got some people have been with us 17 years. So they came up with, and it was interesting to see how protective they were of this money that was still imaginary at this point, and how they didn't think that some areas would deserve as much as other areas. And it was really nice to see how the floor staff appreciated the kitchen staff. And we came up with a very good model. So it's based on length of service, amounts of money paid out first based on length of service. And then the second criteria is hours worked, and there's 4 different criteria for hours worked in the year rather than hours worked per week, because we have seasonal staff that might work 10 weeks a year but really do work, and they're as important as somebody that might work 3 days a week for the full year. And then so as soon as they reach their 3,600 mark, that's the maximum we're paying out. So our aim is to get as many people as we can up to that 3,600 a year tax-free mark, and they can do that through either length of service or hours worked. The rules are set for this year. We've agreed that we're going to meet with the council towards the end when we know what everyone's going to get this year, and see if those rules are applicable for the following year, or can we tweak them to make it better for the business. And bearing in mind, the caveat for all of them was the bonuses only come out of profit. So don't be, your decisions come based on what will make the most money for people, for the business, because that money is going then directly to you. So it was nice to put a bit of a commercial hat on people as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I was supposed to say that's really helpful. I think John's got a really nice little model for his bonus. It's probably worth noting from the sort of legal perspective is that you don't have to pay the EOT bonus to equally to everybody. Obviously, John doesn't do that, but you are limited to differentiating on the base of hours worked, which you use, John, length of service, which you use, and also remuneration, which John doesn't use, but some people
we don't
do.
use at all.
And you can use a mix of all of those things. There are particular rules about how you can multiply them together, which isn't allowed, and there are particular rules that the outcome, if your outcome when you've used these rules ends up with, let's say, your managing director, John, getting a bonus of £3,600 and nobody else getting anything at all, you'll need to be looking at that again, because that doesn't work. It needs to be kind of equitable, fair, but not equal. So there are specific rules. It's always worth checking before you put in a bonus arrangement for an EOT business that you're following those legislative requirements. Otherwise, you might end up getting taxed on them.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, because the rules I originally presented to you, or the plan that the staff originally came up with, was a multiplier, which was a no-go. They had to be clearly defined. This is one criteria that's available for all to achieve. This is another criteria, not X multiplied by Z equals your board. So, we would have fallen foul of that without some legal advice from Sarah.
So I've just seen there's another little question popped up, Yogi, which is like, can you base a bonus on performance targets? And no, you can't. You would have to use an ordinary taxable bonus to do that.
Fab. I've got another quite popular question here. John, I'm going to start with you for this one. Did you take financial advice prior to starting the EOT process to give you confidence you could live the life you wanted after you exited the business?
Well, I originally got put in touch with RM2 through my financial advisor. And bearing in mind, we're going back 5.5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. So at that time, EOTs were, they weren't very common at all. You know, John Lewis, everyone had heard of that. And I think that was the main one that people had heard of. My financial advisor, his company, which is quite a large company, transitioned to an EOT 2 years after us. And we were probably the guinea pigs, and he thought, oh, we'll try it out on John, and if it works with him, then we'll. So yes, took financial advice. Probably ignored most of it, because I probably think I know better, and that'll come good. But it was definitely something we took advice on, because the profitability of the restaurant had been phenomenal for the 8 years prior. So it wasn't like we didn't have money and then had a lot of money to deal with. We'd managed to grow into ourselves. So, and that was part of the reason for selling. As I said, I think I mentioned the guilt of running a successful restaurant. I had people working for us, every hour, through the weekends. and I started to want to do things with my life and felt a bit guilty that I was getting rewarded 10 times more than they were, 15 times more than they were. And that didn't sit very well with me at all. So part of the reason of coming back as I said, a voluntary MD was I sort of wanted to show the staff as well. Sometimes you need to make sacrifices to be successful. And that was a great way of me working for them effectively for nothing. And I know that won't work for everybody, but for us, for me, because again, I said I missed something when I left the business. You do need something if you've been so used to doing business all your life. And, I thought I'd do a building project and I'll do some other stuff. It's not the same as having 150 people pecking your head about holidays and everything else that go on. So I needed weaning off the business probably as much as they needed weaning off me.
I like that. I like that analogy of being weaned off. We often talk about kind of founders letting go and how they're going to do that and where else they're going to put their energies. So I've got a bit more technical questions around set. So there seems to be a couple of questions around kind of selling the business at different stages. So Sarah, with the exemption, from capital gains tax, is it only available in the first tranche of shares that you sell? So if a founder sells 75% and actually then they want to sell another 25% later on, do they still get that CGT relief when they sell the other 25%?
No, it's a one chance only. Selling the shares in the tax year, you'll get your CGT relief. Anything afterwards, it's just ordinary capital gains tax, which is why not always, but an awful lot of our vendors do sell 100% because it just makes more sense.
And then if the EOT afterwards is sold on, what happens in terms of the kind of proceeds from that sale? Who benefits?
That would be distributed to the employee owners, and the distribution would be made on basically the same basis as the way the bonus is calculated, worked out on hours, length of service, and salary. And if the EOT, this is where your kind of hybrid scheme comes into place. And in John's case, the EOT employee owners would get 51%, and then the share scheme people would get their percentage as well. There are some specific rules about percentage shareholdings, which I don't particularly want to go into now. So it's not quite as straightforward as that, but broadly, that's how you would end up working a clump of shares for everybody, and then individual shareholdings for the minority shareholders.
Okay. John, I've got a governance type question for you. Do you have an independent trustee on your board?
No, I don't think. No, we have. No, we don't. So we have on the Employee Ownership Trust Board, so we have two boards of directors, myself and Maxine, who make up 40% of that board. And then we have 3 people from within the restaurant who are directors now. One is an operations person and 2 are managers within the business. So they could outvote anything that we came across. But everyone is on that board for the good of the staff. The reason we sold the business was for the good of the staff. So, and the way everyone looks at it is that is their money. It's their business, their control. The board of directors of the operational company is a completely different thing. That is an operational, we make decisions for the good of the business. But we could be sacked by the EOT board, if we weren't doing a good job for their, they own 51%. So I'm more than happy if they would like to do that. That would be fine.
Is it something that you've considered in terms of getting an independent board?
It would cost money. And why would we pay somebody that's eaten out of the staff's money? People don't generally do things for the love of it generally. So I would say that if they wanted it, I would be more than happy to be replaced on that. I know Maxine would love to be replaced on it. We see it as a duty rather than a benefit. But yes, no, I haven't considered it, but wouldn't have a problem with it at all.
Okay. I've got a question here from the audience around freelancers. So, John, I know that you mentioned you have seasonal employees.
Mhm.
So, the question here, I think Sarah, it might be for you initially, but John, you can maybe share some of your advice here as well. Is it possible to include freelancers in the EOT model, or do they have to be employees?
They have to have employment status.
And again, I guess that's for you as well, John. Those seasonal staff are employees rather than being.
Yeah, they are employees, and
Yeah.
they're employees with continuous service as well. So we don't just say, right, you're here for 8 weeks, we'll employ you for 8 weeks. We keep them on indefinitely till their period of employment is over. So they get the length of service criteria from ours, because somebody could, from sixth form to the end of university, could be with us 5 years, could be with us 6 years by the time they found their dream job out of the industry. So I think they need to be treated for our business as an employee forever.
Okay. We've got John, this one is for you. Can you go into a bit more detail about the vendor's loan?
Yes.
Individuals not sure how it worked.
Okay, so with our vendor's loan, we had a valuation of the business, and let's say we'll use close numbers but different numbers. Let's say the business, we got 4 valuations of the business ranging from 20 million down to 7.6, I think. We chose the 7.6 valuation for the very reason that you can come up with any valuation in the world, but if you can't pay for that business out of the profit, then if this whole process took 20 years, you can't engage people for that period of time. We thought 5 years was the longest we could engage people, and I couldn't sell the business externally for £20 million, so why would I expect anyone else to buy it for 20 million? The vendors, a bank, bearing in mind we're a leasehold business, we don't own the property that we have, exceptionally profitable but leasehold nonetheless. A bank wouldn't be willing to lend 100% of that transaction. So we kept 1.7 million of our sale value as a loan, an interest-free loan to the company that was going to be paid back after the bank were paid back. So that was the vendor's loan effectively. So we had a massive incentive for the business to do well, not just cut and dry, because if I was the bank, I wouldn't be comfortable lending to a company where the 2 directors and founders were heading off to Barbados for the rest of their lives. I would want some skin in the game, and I think that's the way they view it. You need enough skin in the game that you're not just won the lottery and you're gone.
Okay, thank you. I've got one last question for you, Sarah, before we do a bit of a wrap up. Can the debt be structured over a longer period? So it's slightly, kind of connecting with what John said in terms of that debt period. So say 10 years, and then the bonuses and dividends paid in part during the same period, provided the debt is serviced. Is that?
The short answer is yes. Some owners or sellers won't have something called Financial Freedom Day when the debt is paid off, and they won't pay any bonuses and they won't pay any dividends until that debt is cleared. On the question of dividends, I think that you wouldn't be paying dividends to the trust anyway. If in that situation, if you'd sold 75% to an EOT and 25% had been retained by the initial vendors, I would not be paying dividends to the vendors. I would be focusing on the debt. Don't think that would be appropriate at all, because you're taking money that should really be for 75% of the proceeds should really be for the employees. It's not fair to over reward your existing sellers. The 10-year point, yes, you can do it over 10 years. Some EOT transactions see the debt paid back over a longer period than 10 years. At RM2, we don't really think that's appropriate. As John said, it's a really long period to get people involved. It's not. We have a particular arrangement in our transactions where after 10 years, if the debt's not been paid off, that's an end of it. Because effectively it means at the beginning of the period, you overvalued your business. If you haven't paid your debt off in 10 years, then the number you thought of at the beginning was too big. You're just taking money out of the hands of your employees. So we get a little bit snitty about that.
Mm-hmm.
we talk about best practice. Sorry, John.
Yes.
Yeah, and just one point to make: for the first 5 years, not one penny from our business went anywhere other than to service the loan. So when we were successful and more successful than maybe we'd bargained for in some periods, we overpaid the loan immediately. So it wasn't there, and that didn't go in any other form of budget in bonuses. Our mission from day one was to get the loan paid off as quickly as possible, because as soon as that's done, you're not paying interest rate for a start, and then that money is clean for the staff to be used for them. And you know, we'd been paid. We were happy enough. So yeah, nothing. So to keep staff engaged in the early days, it was something that was so 5 years. You know, sometimes we pay fortnightly, sometimes a fortnight away is a long time to wait for money. So to keep people engaged for 5 years, and one of my biggest frustrations in the early days was the staff didn't act like they owned the business. And I said, why are you wasting that? Why are you doing that? Why are you calling those? Because that's that could go against the loan. And it was just very difficult in the early days. I must say that's completely changed now, that money is going into the pot to distribute this year. And that's pleasing in one way, but also a little bit frustrating, because the money that they were making in those early days was going to pay off that loan, to give them quicker ownership.
There's definitely something there around that kind of engaging them. Yes, it was a financial, tangible engagement, but actually it's made them see things in a slightly different light.
Yes.
So we've got lots more questions here, but what I'd really like to do is give those individuals opportunities to maybe have some more informal conversations with yourselves in our networking area. So what we're going to do now is that everyone will be taken through to our virtual networking lounge. Please do go and join Sarah or John on a table. We've also got Richard Cowley and John Besant from RM2 on different tables. So again, questions around valuation, share schemes, etc. Moving to EOT, you can ask those individuals, get some more insight from John. We'll also have a member of our EOA team, Leslie, who will be on a table to share with you any information that you want to know about becoming an EOA member, or generally how you can be supported within the journey. And I'll also be on a table as well, talking about our EO training courses. Again, I mentioned a couple that we've got coming up specifically for targeted towards those businesses that are moving to EO. Come and have a chat to me. I can tell you more about them. One thing I will say is you can join tables and engage in conversations. If you want to leave a table, please do so. Like networking in a room, we're encouraging people to move about. So you'll have about 20-25 minutes within the networking area, and then you'll be brought back here where I can say goodbye and get some bit of a wrap up and feedback to you, and hopefully tell you a little bit more about the events and the training courses we've got coming up as well. So have fun conversations, and I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I could see that we had lots of conversations happening on all three of the tables that we had. Really hope you had some good conversations. I know I'll certainly be leaving today having learned a bit more, certainly about John's, John's story today. But as I wrap up, just wanted to throw up, if you haven't joined the EOA yet, please come and have a chat to us. You'll be getting a wrap-up email with all the key information that you need. If you're on that journey or if you're exploring, we can get you in touch with various different businesses that have made that transition to employee ownership, and they're happy to share their story, just like John did today as well. And also lots of resources, etc., for you to tap into. And just finally, just a reminder of our key EO Learn training courses coming up and our events. So you can book for all of these through our website. I'd mentioned a couple around leadership succession, the communicating your transition to the team. Please do go and check them out on our website. The booking's really easy. 3 of them are virtual, 1 of them is in person. The leadership succession has been developed through some really good evidence-based research, and it really is an opportunity to get in a room with people and have those discussions and build those relationships for the future. Again, just a quick flash up of the events that we have coming up. I had spoken to a couple of people about our People Powered Business webinar. So again, please do have a look. We've got some exciting things to be sharing with you. And again, if you're looking for something in person, if you get a buzz out of, having a chat to people in real life, come along to our session in London on the 17th of April. Also, as always, we love getting feedback from our delegates here today. So if you could scan the QR code with your phone and give us some feedback about today's events. What can we do better? What did you enjoy? What do you want to see more of from us? Because actually, this is something that we love sharing information with those individuals that are exploring employee ownership, and we really want to make sure that we're making these sessions relevant to those individuals joining us. So I just want to say thank you to John and Sarah for today's session and for sharing their information with us, sharing their insights with us. And we hope to see you at more of our webinars. Thanks. Bye.